hearing from the mother of a man declared missing in Myrtle Beach.
This is not like our son. He would not just disappear without a trace. He just wouldn't.
Home like arrived.
Not knowing where her son is or if he's okay, she's living a mother's worst nightmare.
I'm worried that he is hurt. It's the not knowing. It's the nightmare in all this. I'm worried that someone is hurting. I just beg the public to keep us in your prayers because, God is the only one that's going to get us all through this.
Christopher Bowling's mother contacted the Myrtle Beach Police Department because even though he was 25 years old, Chris was the sort of person who got in touch with his mother fairly frequently, but he didn't make any contact for 5 or 6 days. He stopped showing up at work. It got to the point where several people were concerned.
Chris's mom, she was just extremely emotional and convinced that something bad had happened to Chris.
Shortly after police received the phone call, they checked local hospitals. No hits on the hospitals. They went to his apartment, knocked several times. No answer at the apartment. They had no leads. It's like he had just vanished.
Marissa shared with us that Chris was from Tennessee, but moved to Myrtle Beach because his son, who was 2 at the time, lived in Myrtle Beach, and he wanted to be closer to his son. She told us that on July 28th, Chris was supposed to have their son, and that she had not heard from him. She said that was very out of character and unlike him, that he was always reliable when it would come to meeting with his son. And she was extremely worried about Chris. There was no activity after the late evening of the 27th. We still weren't sure if there was some kind of foul play, but we all felt that something bad had happened to Chris.
Chris was my best friend. He would even tell people, I'm a mama's boy, He had a big heart. He loved his sisters. With the youngest one, when she was born, Chris called her his baby, and he was very protective of her. He was so special and so gifted. He became passionate in rapping at the age 14, 15, somewhere around in there. I mean, to hear him spit those lyrics out like he did, it's unreal. Chris had ambition, perseverance. As he got older, he was wanting to be a producer. He would make beats for other kids out there that wanted to go into that type of music. When he went missing, I felt like I'm in a nightmare and I'm never going to wake up. I keep looking at my phone, hoping that he would text or call. I was praying that Chris was alive.
July 27th is not only the last day Christopher Sky Bowling was officially seen in Myrtle Beach, but it's also the last day Kelly Simmerly says she heard from her sons.
We want answers. We want to know where our son is.
We are speaking with Tyler Panzarella.
You actually sent it?
How long have you known Chris?
Not too long.
He advised that he did not know Chris very well, that he had met Chris through a mutual friend.
And so his son and stuff was here, so he was asking me, he's like, hey, I want to come down to Myrtle Beach and everything. Could you help me out and let me stay with you? I'll pay you rent or whatever. And I was like, yeah, no problem.
And then Tyler told us that Chris decided to come down here with his two friends from back home as well, Bailey and Nick. Once they arrived, Bailey and Nick also asked, hey, can we also stay with you for some time? And he agreed, yes, they all could stay there temporarily.
So last time I heard from him, I think it was like the 26th, 27th, I believe it was. And then he just kept talking about like this girl he was talking about and going to like North Carolina with her.
Who's the girl, do you know?
I have no idea. I don't know the specific name. And then like he didn't answer my phone calls or nothing, anything, nothing at all. So,
Do you have Bailey and Nick's numbers?
yeah.
Tyler said that after Chris went missing, Nick and Bailey had moved back to Tennessee.
Tyler didn't seem nervous, but the information he was sharing that Chris would all of a sudden run off with a girl as much as he cared about his son, it didn't make sense. There was a gut feeling that things weren't adding up and that something was wrong.
Nick Henry said that he had not spoken to Chris since the end of July and that he had basically left Myrtle Beach to be with a girl. Again, it was just more of the same story that just didn't make any sense to us. Something just wasn't right.
Detectives delved into his Snapchat, found a couple posts that he had made the day that he went missing. He had posted a full-body selfie where you could see what he was wearing. The shoes he was wearing were some blue Jordans.
We learned that Chris was actually making plans to stay in Myrtle Beach. He was in the process of getting his own apartment. He had posted on social media on the 27th showing that apartment complex. That contradicted what we had learned from Tyler and Nick as far as him leaving town with a girl.
We were very suspicious of Tyler, so we had a cadaver dog come and be on scene during the search warrant.
The cadaver dog that was brought in actually alerted inside the apartment between the living room and the master bedroom. That was a location that Chris was known to sleep at.
And when the dog got to the area, it positively alerted for human remains.
Speaking to the people that, are in charge of those dogs, they said it could have been something as simple as some kind of trace evidence or something being carried from clothing or from the shoes and that kind of stuff to the apartment. So at that point, we are transitioning from this missing persons case to now we're having direct evidence of a homicide occurring.
Hey, Tyler, how you doing? Good. I'm Detective Eddie. This is Detective Whitmire. You mind if we step in and talk to you?
Our game plan was to start non-confrontational and kind of let him run the interview at that point.
All you're signing for is that I read you your rights and you understand those rights.
Then after we get his statement on video, we would start questioning the inconsistencies and make it more of an interrogation.
What day was the last time you saw Chris?
26 or 27.
So what was the circumstance around that?
It was just night. He said he was leaving, and then Nick was like, oh, I think he's just going with that girl and spending the night.
So, I mean, like, you guys inside when he's, like, packing up his stuff? Like, what's
I was leaving because I went to go to my friend Devin's house on Caroline Forest.
Anybody else go with you guys?
Yeah, Nick and Bailey went with me to Devin's.
Did you guys hang around until you saw him leave, or you guys just dropped him off?
Just dropped him off. Like, the back of the parking lot. That's when he was just gone.
Now he's locked himself into the story. Then that's when we decided to transition to the interrogation, asking direct questions and being able to verify whether he's been caught in a lie.
I think he was talking to Nick about it. I didn't talk to him at all. We're all grown men, so we all do our own thing.
You know, originally we were kind of helping the missing persons division, okay? At this point, I mean, we think that something happened to Chris. And we're obviously talking to you because you're one of the last people that saw him, okay? This is the important part, okay, for you to basically be 100% truthful and just listen to me for a second, okay? To tell us everything you know, okay? Because we think something happened here, possibly an accident, okay? And we think you know something about it. We've been in investigation for a long time. The Myrtle Beach Police Department has not solved an investigation like this since 2000, okay? 20 years. So, what do you think?
What I was saying, that's 100% truthful. You know what I mean? I haven't seen him since then.
I'll tell you right now, I mean, when we came here to the search warrant, we had a cadaver dog come. The dog alerted to possible deceased person in your apartment.
That doesn't make sense. Did it where? Did he alert? Or like where? Is it just like in general? Just like...
What I'm trying to do, I mean, I'm not playing games with you. If you're,
I'm not either.
I know.
I know.
What I'm saying is, I'm trying to give you every opportunity to basically tell us anything additional you may have. We need to know now because later on, when we put the puzzle together, which we're going to do, we're not going to have this conversation. Does that make sense?
You could tell Tyler was getting a little nervous.
It's at that point he realizes that his story's falling apart. So he has an option, and the option is to change his story or tell the truth.
I don't know specific dates. I was drinking that night. Like, it was just like little arguments, like over stupid stuff.
Have you ever had a weapon?
It was a 9mm, but it went missing whenever Nick left. When he left to Tennessee.
Do you think that Nick or Bailey would be capable of doing something to Chris?
I wouldn't say Bailey. I mean, just from like the way Nick talks and carries himself, like maybe. Nick scares me. Okay, if I can be really honest, like truthfully, like this was like it freaks me out, and so like he like said weird stuff about, or basically like that he might have done something, and that just scared the shit out of me. Cause like I've never been around that. I've never like, you know what I mean?
What did he tell you?
What was the road? What's that old haunted road? Like on Lucas Fair Road?
I never heard this story.
It's like apparently a haunted road back there. He was saying he went there and like did something or whatever. Like said he killed somebody. But like, and then that's when my gun went missing. But I don't know who it was. It doesn't scare me.
Well, hearing that story,
yeah. But
do you think it could be Chris?
I mean, now, yeah. Honestly.
As Tyler is recounting that part of the story, I felt that he was telling partial truths, but we were trying to just not show any reaction, just keep him talking.
If you're scared of Nick or Bailey or someone else, or, you know, the best thing you do if you want to help yourself out is tell the truth. So, did you see Chris dead at any point? Okay. Can you tell us what happened?
Vic was telling me to go there. He thought we were just gonna go do some like haunted stuff or like by that road or whatever. So like we went there, and then like he had my gun or whatever, and then just like just shot him.
Nick shot Chris. How many times did you shoot him? Where? Then what happened?
Just shaking, scared of my life. I don't know if he was gonna shoot me or what. I don't know, I'm not a crime. Like, this was like the scariest I've ever seen.
I completely understand.
When he's talking about shaking and freaking out, he's showing no emotion at all. To me, his demeanor seemed like he's being dishonest, but we were extremely concerned with finding out where Chris was. So we didn't want to press too much.
So you're out there on Lucas Road. Who's with you? You?
Nick and Bailey.
Okay, so the four of you get out of the car, and what happens?
And we just walked into the woods and we just shot.
What was the conversation before the gun went off?
Nothing. We're just all walking through the woods.
So how did Nick get the gun? I mean, he just took it out of your car? Or who had the gun when you guys got out of the car?
Because I was walking, and because he told me to bring it or whatever, so I was like, okay. And then he was like, hey, let me see it. And I was like, for what? He's like, oh, I just want to shoot it or whatever. So I was like, okay. And then I handed it to him.
How far were they standing?
I like, saying like that.
Okay, so 6 feet, give or take? Arm extended, or?
Yeah.
How? No, you can.
Okay,
You don't
yeah,
have anything near him.
Yeah, okay, yeah, not literally just like that.
I could tell that he was reliving that moment. He appeared to be seeing Chris. He didn't see me standing there, and you could just see the blank look in his eyes. It seemed like he was the one that shot Chris, and he was trying to shift the focus to Nick.
He seemed to be giving us all the facts of the case, just downplaying his involvement at that point.
So did Nick say anything right after he shot him?
Nothing. He just was quiet, and then he was like, take this.
So he gave you back the gun?
Yeah, and I didn't know what to do, so I just grabbed
Then-
it and I went to the car.
He's telling us that Nick shoots somebody with his gun, with Tyler's gun, and then gives the gun back to him. At this point, you'd be able to point the gun at Nick if you want to. You'd be able to say, I'm leaving, I'm getting in my car, I'm not taking you with me, I'm going to the police. Just doesn't make sense.
So where's his body now? Like Lucas Road somewhere?
Yeah.
You think you can get as close to the spot?
Yeah, I mean, I could probably go with you guys.
That moment, Tyler was the lead in the homicide investigation. At that point, we did not have any physical evidence, and we did not have a body, so we charged him with obstruction of justice for impeding and hindering our missing person investigation.
He's just gonna pat you down, man. You got a handcuff key on your thing? Yeah. You just want to get him out and take the shackles off. Swing your feet around, man. We're going to take these leg shackles off real fast.
The entire time, he didn't put off an air of being scared. He was just cold and emotionless.
To the right a little bit or something like that? Yeah. It's kind of like saying that you're 1, 2 o'clock. I think this is about the spot then. You want to check it out.
For me, in that moment, the lack of emotion just solidified that he was the one that shot Chris.
Be careful where you're stepping if there's a crime scene.
You remember what shoes he was wearing that night?
See, like blue Jordans.
Blue and white?
From where I'm standing, I can see shoes that appear to be the same shoes that Chris was wearing in the Snapchat from the night before he went missing. For me, that was probably one of the biggest moments of the case, because at that point, you know that it's more than likely going to be Chris.
I remember telling my husband, he's gone. He's gone. I didn't want to believe it. I would have died for him. He was my world.
Once the body's found, we decided let's basically turn that heat up. We were trying to rattle Tyler. We're trying to get him to make a confession. As a law enforcement officer, you're actually allowed to lie in interviews. You just got to be careful as far as, what you're lying about.
I just talked to the guys in Tennessee. They're saying, them boys there are saying he's the guy.
Sergeant Lent tells them that he just talked to Nick and Bailey and that they are saying that Tyler is the shooter. What he is saying is a lie.
We had not spoken to Nick or Bailey. We wanted to see if he changed his story or what his reaction was.
They saying that you planned this, you drove him out there, you had the gun, y'all walked out there, you gave the gun, you shot him.
No, I never had a problem with Chris, nothing, ever. I'm not like that, man. I came from a good family, I promise you, man. Like, I would never do that to someone, ever.
They say you did it.
No. I'm telling you, I'm a good person. I would never in my entire life, ever.
You saying you was a good guy? Why didn't you call 911 whenever you left there? You just left him out there to die.
Because I was scared, man. I didn't know what to do.
This is your chance. I mean, did you do it? Did you kill him?
No. I'm being 100% honest on everything. No. I told you everything that happened. No.
So was it an accident? You shoot him by accident?
I never
or you just a monster and just say, hey, I'm going to take you into the woods and blow your head off?
Oh, man, Nick had the gun. He's been, like, he scares me. He's been scared me ever since, like, he got, like, that's the type of person he is.
So for a normal person, if you are scared and you just saw somebody murder somebody, are you going to, one, take that gun back? And then if you're truly nervous, now you have the only weapon. So at that point, why not remove yourself from the situation? But he's doing everything that Nick tells him to do, even when Nick no longer has a gun, which is kind of strange.
I know I should have told you guys. I've never been around that. I've never been in that situation. If you're surrounded by someone every day, you're going to get on each other's nerves.
All right, Tyler, sit tight. We'll be right back, okay? All right, Tyler, this is Sergeant Lent. This is my sergeant, okay?
Sergeant Lent is more assertive, more direct.
I've been sitting in another room listening to you, listening to everything you say. And all these guys have told me everything that's been going on for the last 3 or 4 weeks or whenever the hell this started. All right? You're how old?
23.
What do you plan on doing with your life?
Be the best person I can be.
Really?
Yes, sir.
Where do you want to be that best person? Let me tell you right now, you're fixing to go to prison. Guess what's going to get done to Tyler? You're going from here, you're going to get charged with murder. You're going to be charged with killing Chris. Do you understand that? Look at me. Don't sit there and give me these crocodile tears. Tyler, don't sit here and bullshit me. Tyler. You've played the game in here long enough. You're involved in some that you would have never, ever been done if you were a good person. Because you don't go out to Lucas Bay Lights and bring a gun into the woods at night if you ain't got something planned. So be honest. This story, to be able to tell this story, shouldn't take you any more than 5 minutes, from beginning to end.
So that's what you think. You think I'm just that type of person. And I don't know where.
Yeah, I think you're the kind of person that takes a friend out into the middle of the woods.
From what representation, though? Is what
from your own words. You took your gun out of the glove box. You can smile all the you
I'm not
want.
smiling right now.
You're smirking.
I'm not
You
smirking.
took your gun out of the damn glove box. You handed it to you say you handed it to another kid, who then shot your buddy. And then you all just, let's just go back in the car and go back to my apartment. It takes you a month to come forward and say,
I didn't know what to do.
No, you didn't know what to do. You're a good person. But good people, you know what they don't do? They don't leave a kid to lay out in the woods to get eaten by animals. That's what you did. You got him. 5 minutes. 5 minutes. You better talk.
It may appear that he lost his patience and left the room, but that's by plan. Lent, the quote-unquote bad cop, and Detective DeWitt being the good cop, that was pretty much our strategy at that point. After Lent's no longer in the room, hopefully Tyler is now going to open up to the other detective that's in that room. Because he's being nice and reasonable, I want to talk to him.
Is there anything else you could think of, anything whatsoever?
You know what happened, you know what the story is, you know where the body is, and stuff like that. I made a mistake. I should have came to you guys sooner, and I didn't know what to do. I had no idea. But now I gotta live with that. There's really nothing I can do to get away from this, or... No, I know that. I made a mistake, dude. Now I gotta pay for that.
He never came out and said he was the one who did it. But the interrogation of Tyler was critical because he put himself there. He was the only one who owned a gun. His story, it didn't make sense. It didn't all match up. What is important to consider in this case is that Nick and Bailey are from Tennessee. Meanwhile, Tyler is from around here. If any of them would be familiar with a local ghost story that is urban legend around here, it would certainly have been Tyler. Now, it was extremely important for the officers to talk to Nick and to talk to Bailey, for them to establish everything that happened during that shooting.
Hey, how are you? Try to relax, okay? We're just gonna have a conversation, all right? Yeah.
He was like very thrown off his game because he was obviously seeing us from Myrtle Beach and Horry County. I'm sure that heightened his senses and the fact where it's like he knows why we're there.
So what's about to happen to me? Am I going to jail?
Like I said, let's have a conversation and we'll kind of cross that bridge when we get to it, okay? All right, Nick, so keep it real with you, okay?
Yeah.
Obviously, we from South Carolina. I work for Horry County. He works for Myrtle Beach. We've been working on the case for quite some time now, okay? And we have reason to believe that you are involved in that case, okay? So we're going to go back to the night of the July 27th, 2020.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
I don't want to say anything.
Why? Take some deep breaths, man.
Yeah, he told me, he was like, if you ever tell anybody, I'm going to give you and your grandma. But I didn't have my grandma. Please. Make sure you can't do nothing. Please. He has my house keys.
Take some deep breaths, man.
So please.
Just drink some water.
He was so emotional that he couldn't control himself.
It was important to try to settle him, make him feel comfortable and relaxed. There are times where you need to be softer and coax the information that you are trying to learn.
Boil it for days, basically, your side of the story, and we'll have a conversation. That's all we're gonna do today, okay?
So tell me what happened.
Okay, just Tyler did it.
Did what?
Shot him. Please don't tell him I told you.
So, Tyler's in jail, so he's not a threat to your family, okay? But, unfortunately, you got you wrapped up in this, okay? So we're just trying to see what you can provide to us as far as from your point of view, okay? To make sure we have the story correct. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's what we're looking for from you.
Okay, so we're in the car and we're driving.
Who was there?
Baby, Sky, and Tyler.
Whenever you say Sky, who's Sky? What's his real name?
Chris. I guess Sky said something about his nephew or something like that and started making fun of him, and Tyler just looked at him like that was the last straw. They haven't really got along.
What else can you tell me?
We're just driving and I didn't know where the hell we were going. And Tyler, his face was on some old dirt road. He's talking about some haunted forest or haunted something. And everybody was just freaked out. And we started walking, and he made sure he was behind us. And we all got somewhere wherever he wanted us to go to. We told us to stand in specific spots. And he just threw some. I was terrified. I didn't know if I was going to die too, and I've never seen anything like that before, and I didn't know what to do.
So you didn't touch the body at all?
No, I promise I didn't. I swear to God.
Pulse, nothing. Just left him there.
I was scared. He just popped him in front of me.
One of the differences in the interview with Nick as opposed to the interview with Tyler, Nick was very upset and showing fear, a lot of emotion. He just seems to be saying what he's feeling and exactly what he's trying to convey.
He's actually scared of the whole situation compared to like where Tyler's very composed.
So why would he say you shot him?
Tyler said I shot him because Tyler shot him. Like, listen, bro. Like, I'm telling y'all the God's honest truth. I did not do it. He did it.
When you see someone get extremely emotional in the face of an allegation of a crime, moving around and waving around, usually they're being honest because they're worried and upset that you're going to believe false information. But with Nick, we thought to push him a little further and see if his emotions changed, if his demeanor changed, and if anything in his story changed.
And I have the proof that it was his gun. It was the first day I met him, and he showed me. It was not me. I swear to God.
That's what y'all left in the woods right there.
Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah, you tell me what that is. What is that? Show you a better picture. Look at that. Look at it. Look at it. See that? Y'all did that. See that? Look at that. Who's that right there? Who's this right here? Look at it! You see it? Who did that? What are we gonna tell his kids, man? Huh? Who is that right there? Look at it.
That's God, man. I didn't do it. I swear to God, I didn't do it. I did not want none of that to happen to him. I swear to God. I swear to God on everything. I promise. I swear to God. Like, I'm the one who took him down there to see his kid.
And now he's dead.
It's not my
He's
fault.
dead.
It's not my fault, bro.
Even under that extreme pressure, you know, he's still saying he didn't do it.
It's not my fault.
He's still naming Tyler the person that did it. So you're seeing him actually get frustrated, getting angry about the situation because he's being blamed in his mind for something that he didn't do.
Did you talk to the plan with Tyler?
No,
Tyler. Contribute to the plan that Tyler had for this whole situation?
No. Neither did Bailey.
What percent of responsibility do you think Tyler has for this? What happened? 0 to 100. 0 being the least, 100 being the worst.
Like 100. He's the one who.
Let me ask you this. Bailey, what percentage do you think he is for this?
None. 0.
0%?
Yeah.
And what percent do you think you are related to this?
I couldn't say anything. I couldn't.
Just percentage-wise, do you think you have no responsibility for what happened?
I mean, I couldn't help it. So like maybe like 2 or something, but I can't just stop that. Cause he was gonna do that to me too. Like, please, it wasn't me. I swear to God, it wasn't me.
Watching Nick, I think that his emotions were real in that aspect. Everything he said and the way he was reacting, I really believe that he was scared of Tyler at that point.
What made it believable was the fact that Nick was not just scared for himself. He was scared for his grandfather and for his family. He seemed to get more emotional talking about that.
All right, this is a voluntary statement. Everything you just told us, you be writing on paper.
All right.
Take time.
Thank you.
It's very important because Bailey hasn't had the finger point at him yet. So we wanted to really talk to Bailey because we figured that he'd be the most independent person. Is he going to say that it was Nick? Is he going to say that it was Tyler?
So here's the deal, Bailey. We ultimately know what happened to Chris. We know you were there. What we're looking for right now is to see how cooperative you're going to be with us, because we don't need you getting in trouble just because your friends put you in a bad situation, because nobody said you did anything, but you were there. What I need to know is, did Tyler shoot him or did Nick shoot him? Who shot him? Who pulled out a gun?
Tyler.
Tyler pulls out his gun and shoots who?
Chris.
How many shots?
Just one.
Okay. Make any direct threats to you?
I mean, he told me if something happened, he'd know.
Some other people we've spoken to said Nick shot him.
No, it wasn't. Now, just because he's my friend, don't mean I'm gonna stand up for him, because I don't think it's right. Either way. But it was Tyler.
Would you be willing to take a polygraph to show that you're not having providing false information to us today?
Yes, sir.
All right, just sit tight for me, all right?
After Bailey's interview, he wrote a written statement, And then he also drew a sketch where the vehicle was parked and the way they were standing in the woods. And it just strengthened our case and Nick and Bailey's version of events.
Bailey gave police all the information that he was able to, and he did not lie. Investigators determined that Bailey's involvement in this case was mere presence, and at that point, he was allowed to leave the police department. Bailey was never charged with anything related to this case.
The interrogations were extremely important in this case. The initial interrogation with Tyler was obviously the huge turning point.
Yeah, not that they just like went down.
All three interrogations put together gave us that timeline of events and the details of what happened that evening.
Normally, you can kind of keep yourself detached from cases. For some reason, this case, it was like Chris didn't do anything to kind of bring this upon himself. Like, he's trying to go to work, trying to be in his child's life. We all really fought really hard to try to find the facts and the truth of what happened in this case to bring closure to his family.
I want people to remember Chris the way I remember Chris. The happy, joyful, witty, charming kid that he was. If I could say something to Chris right now, I would tell him that I loved him and hopefully one day I'd see him soon.
The call comes in after midnight, the kind of hour when truth feels heavier and lies finally get tired of standing upright. And somewhere in Florida, a phone line crackles with a voice that hasn't spoken this name out loud in decades. A voice that hesitates, swallows, then drops a sentence that will reopen a wound sealed shut since 1992. A sentence that will drag an entire town back to a night they tried to forget, because some nights never end, they just wait. And this is one of them. Florida, summer of 1992. The air thick enough to press against your lungs. Cicadas screaming in the dark like a warning nobody understands yet. Streetlights buzzing. Neighborhoods quiet in that deceptive way that only exists right before something breaks. And on a narrow residential road lined with modest homes and trimmed lawns, a car sits idling longer than it should. Headlights off, engine ticking. The driver watching a house where a single porch light glows like a target. Like a final. Breath held too long. Inside that house, life is ordinary in the way it always is before it isn't. Dishes drying in a rack, a television murmuring low, a calendar still flipped to the right month. Unaware it's about to become an artifact, and somewhere within those walls a person moves through routine motions. Unaware they're being timed. Unaware the last normal minute is slipping away unnoticed, because history never announces itself. It just arrives and leaves wreckage behind. When the scream finally tears through the night, it's sharp and brief, cut short as if the air itself swallowed it, and neighbors will later say they thought it was a TV, or a cat, or nothing worth getting out of bed for, because hindsight is cruel and memory edits itself to survive. And by the time the first door opens, by the time someone steps onto a porch and looks around, the street has already gone still again, the car gone, the porch light still burning, the silence louder than the scream ever was. Police arrive to flashing lights and confused faces, radio squawking, officers stepping carefully into a scene that doesn't yet know it will become infamous, and what they find inside is wrong in a way that hits the body before the brain. Furniture displaced just enough to suggest panic, not chaos, a struggle measured, purposeful, and at the center of it all a body positioned in a way that suggests urgency, rage, or both, the kind of violence that leaves questions hanging in the air like smoke. The victim's name is spoken softly at first, then louder as it spreads from room to room, from house to house, from block to block, until by morning it's on everyone's lips. A name paired instantly with disbelief, shock, and a single word whispered over coffee cups and morning newspapers. Why, and the details leak slowly, carefully, as investigators begin their work, photographing, bagging, measuring, trying to impose order on something designed to destroy it. There are no signs of forced entry, no shattered windows, no kicked-in door, and that detail lodges itself deep in the investigation like a splinter, because it means one of two things: either the victim knew the person who came inside, or the door was opened willingly, and both possibilities are dangerous. Both narrow the circle while widening the fear, because suddenly the threat feels closer, familiar, maybe even friendly. Detectives canvass the neighborhood under the rising Florida sun, knocking on doors, asking the same questions over and over. Did you hear anything? See anything? Anyone out of place? And they get the usual answers: half memories, contradictions. A neighbor who swears they saw a car but can't remember the color. Another who heard footsteps but not the direction. A woman who remembers a man standing too long under a streetlight days earlier, but can't say why it stuck with her, only that it did. Inside the house, evidence tells a fragmented story: fingerprints smudged beyond usefulness, fibers that could belong to anyone, a partial shoe impression that won't quite match anything in the system, and blood, more than expected, less than feared, patterns suggesting movement, suggesting the victim tried to get away, suggesting the assailant followed, relentless, controlled, and somewhere in that dance of violence a decision was made that cannot be undone. The weapon is recovered nearby, discarded as if it suddenly became heavy, as if the person carrying it realized too late what it meant to keep holding on, and it's sent off for testing that, in 1992, feels advanced but will later be described as primitive, limited, hopeful in a way science hadn't yet earned, and investigators cling to it anyway, because you cling to what you have when what you don't have is everything else. As days turn into weeks, the victim's life is pulled apart piece by piece, friends interviewed, co-workers questioned, phone records examined, relationships scrutinized under fluorescent lights, and nothing explodes into clarity. No obvious enemy emerges, no dramatic revelation drops like a hammer, only small tensions, minor conflicts, the normal frictions of being alive, none of them sharp enough to explain the brutality left behind. The community responds the way communities always do after something like this, with candlelight vigils and folded hands, with whispered conversations in grocery store aisles, with doors locked a little earlier at night, and parents holding children a little closer, and beneath it all a shared unease, because if this could happen here to someone like that, then what does safety even mean? Police announce they are following several leads, that no one should panic, that the public is not in immediate danger, statements crafted to calm even as uncertainty seeps through every syllable. And behind closed doors the pressure mounts, because cases like this are not just about justice, they're about reassurance, about restoring a sense of order, and every day without an arrest feels like a small failure, a crack spreading. Suspects surface and fade, a former acquaintance with a shaky alibi cleared after corroboration, a stranger passing through town who turns out to be exactly that, a neighbor whose behavior seems odd until it doesn't, and slowly the energy shifts, the manpower reduces. The case file grows thicker even as momentum thins, and the word nobody wants to say starts to hover at the edges of meetings and reports, unsolved. By the time summer gives way to fall, the headlines shrink, the cameras leave, and the victim's family is left with a quiet house full of echoes and questions that have nowhere to go, and investigators box up evidence with the care of people who know this might not be over, but also with the resignation of those who've seen time swallow cases whole, because not all crimes get endings, some just get older. Years pass, then more years, detectives retire, new ones take their places, technology changes, faces blur, but the file labeled with that name and that date remains, pulled occasionally from storage when a new tip comes in, when a new angle is suggested, when someone thinks maybe now is the time, and each time hope flickers, then dims, then waits again. The case becomes a phrase spoken with a shake of the head, a cold case, a shorthand for frustration, for unanswered questions, for a night that refuses to explain itself, and the community adapts, grows, forgets details while remembering the fear, and children who were not yet born in 1992 grow up hearing fragments, rumors, warnings wrapped in bedtime stories about locking doors and not trusting too easily. Inside an evidence room, sealed envelopes sit untouched, biological samples frozen in time, waiting for a future that doesn't yet know it needs them, and somewhere, unknown to everyone involved, the person responsible builds a life on top of that night, layers of normalcy covering something rotten, decades of silence stretching thin but unbroken, until silence itself becomes a burden too heavy to carry. And then, one night, long after the file has gathered dust, after the case has been classified, archived, and quietly mourned, a phone rings, and a voice on the other end says just enough to make an old detective sit up straight, says a name that hasn't been spoken in years, says a detail that was never public, says something that cannot be coincidence, and in that moment, Florida 1992 stops being history and starts breathing again. The cold case cracking open, ready to spill everything it's been holding back. The voice on the line doesn't ramble, doesn't confess, doesn't beg. It simply drops fragments like stones into still water, and each ripple reaches straight back to a night investigators thought they had buried. A detail about the house layout, a movement through the hallway, a pause before the final act that was never written in any report, and the detective listening feels something cold slide down his spine because only one person should know that, and that person has been free for 30 years. By morning, the cold case is no longer cold, it's breathing, pulsing, demanding attention, and a task force quietly reforms under the radar, veterans pulled out of retirement for their memory rather than their stamina, younger analysts brought in for their fluency with tools that didn't exist in 1992. And the first rule is simple: move carefully, because whoever made that call has lived undetected for decades. And panic is how truths disappear. The original evidence is retrieved from storage, boxes cracked open like time capsules, the smell of old paper and sealed plastic filling the room, and every item is relabeled, rephotographed, re-examined, not as artifacts of a failed investigation, but as potential witnesses that have been waiting for the right moment to speak. And suddenly things that once seemed meaningless start to look different under modern light. The weapon, long ago tested and shelved, is sent for advanced analysis. Trace DNA extracted from places nobody thought to look before. Microscopic skin cells trapped in grooves, sweat absorbed into metal, and analysts work in silence, knowing that what they're touching could redraw the past, because technology doesn't just solve crimes, it rewrites narratives. Phone records from 1992 are digitized, cross-referenced with modern databases. Names once scribbled in notebooks now searchable in seconds, and patterns begin to emerge. Calls placed and received around the time of the murder that didn't stand out then but glow now like signals. Connections between people who insisted they barely knew each other. Threads that lead outward from the victim's life into places investigators never fully explored. The late-night tipster becomes the center of gravity. Their call replayed, dissected, every hesitation analyzed. And while they never directly name themselves, they describe proximity, knowledge, guilt-adjacent familiarity, and detectives debate whether they're dealing with a conscience finally cracking, or a calculated move by someone who thinks the statute of limitations on fear has expired. Surveillance is quietly initiated on the individual the tip points toward. A name that appears in the old file only briefly, almost as an afterthought, cleared early because nothing could be proven. Someone who lived close enough to matter but far enough to fade, and as modern investigators begin tracing their life forward from 1992, they find something unsettling, a pattern of sudden moves, fractured relationships, brushes with the law that never stuck. The footprint of someone always just ahead of consequences. Interviews resume, but this time with the weight of decades behind them. Former neighbors now older, slower, more willing to talk, memories resurfacing when prompted by photos, maps, timelines, and a man who once said he heard nothing now admits there was a sound. Something heavy dropped, a door closing too carefully, a memory he buried because it felt dangerous to keep. The victim's family is notified, carefully, cautiously, hope rationed in measured doses, and their reaction is not relief but exhaustion. Because waiting for answers for 30 years doesn't sharpen anticipation, it dulls it, and they've learned that promises can hurt more than silence. Yet when they hear the words "new evidence," something stirs, something that never fully died. Back at the lab, results begin to come in, partial matches at first, inconclusive but suggestive, a genetic profile that doesn't hit immediately but narrows the field, excluding people once suspected, focusing attention on others who were barely considered, and the name from the tip surfaces again, closer this time, not definitive but no longer dismissible. Investigators rewalk the crime scene, standing in the same rooms, mapping movements, recreating sight lines, imagining the victim's last decisions, and something clicks, a realization that the assailant didn't wander, didn't hesitate, they moved with purpose, with familiarity, like someone who had been inside before, who knew where the light switches were, who knew which floorboard would creak. Financial records are pulled, bank statements from the early 90s scanned into modern systems, and a transaction stands out, a sudden withdrawal the morning after the murder, an amount small enough to avoid notice, large enough to suggest urgency, and when matched against the suspect's known movements, it places them in the vicinity at exactly the wrong time. The pressure builds quietly, no press conferences, no leaks, because the goal is not spectacle, it's certainty, and detectives know that after 30 years, a mistake won't just cost a conviction. It will destroy whatever fragile faith the family has left. So they double-check everything, challenge each other's assumptions, argue late into the night over coffee and timelines. The suspect is approached casually at first, an old acquaintance from the past asking if they remember the victim, if they remember that summer, and the response is telling, not in what's said, but in what isn't, a defensiveness that arrives too quickly, a memory that's too rehearsed, a story polished smooth by repetition, and when asked about the night in question, their eyes flick away just a second too long. DNA confirmation comes through days later, not a full match, but enough to establish probable cause when combined with the mountain of circumstantial evidence. And a judge signs off quietly, a warrant prepared, teams briefed, and the realization settles in that the man they're about to arrest has lived free for most of his life, attended barbecues, celebrated birthdays, slept peacefully, while an entire family marked time by absence. The arrest happens without drama. No chase, no resistance, just a knock on a door and a stunned expression when badges are raised. The past finally catching up in a quiet living room decorated with the ordinary trappings of a life that shouldn't have been allowed to continue untouched. And as handcuffs click shut, neighbors peek through curtains, unaware they're watching history correct itself. Interrogation begins in a room far removed from the one in 1992, cameras rolling, techniques refined, patience infinite, and the suspect denies everything at first, insists on coincidence, bad luck, wrong place, wrong time, but investigators don't push, they wait, letting silence do the work, because silence is what sustained this lie for decades, and now it's turning against him. When confronted with evidence, with timelines, with fragments of DNA and financial records and eyewitness recollections sharpened by time, cracks appear, explanations grow convoluted, anger flares, then fades, replaced by something like resignation, and although no full confession is given, the story begins to bend, aligning closer and closer to the truth everyone in the room already sees. Outside, the news finally breaks, headlines flashing words like "cold case reopened" and "suspect arrested after decades of silence." And the community reacts in waves, shock giving way to disbelief, disbelief to anger, anger to a quiet, aching sadness, because solving a case doesn't resurrect the dead. It just names the shadow that's been haunting the room. As the suspect is led away, the victim's name is spoken again, this time not as a mystery, but as a promise fulfilled too late, and while the legal battle still lies ahead, something fundamental has shifted, the night of 1992 no longer sealed, no longer untouchable, its secrets dragged into the light where they've always belonged, even if the light arrives decades late, even if it burns everyone who stands too close. The courtroom air feels heavier than any interrogation room, thick with history and expectation, because this is where silence finally meets consequence, and every bench is filled with people who have lived alongside a question for 3 decades without ever daring to ask it out loud. And as the defendant is brought in, older now, shoulders slumped by time rather than guilt, the past seems to fold in on itself, 1992 bleeding into the present with no warning and no mercy. Prosecutors move carefully, because a cold case doesn't just need truth, it needs resilience. Every piece of evidence tested not only against the defense, but against time itself, and the opening statements avoid drama, relying instead on a slow, methodical reconstruction of a night that refused to stay buried, laying out the geography of the crime, the timeline measured in minutes that once slipped through investigators' fingers, now sharpened into something precise and dangerous. They begin with the scene, described not as a photograph but as a living space interrupted. A modest Florida home quiet under humid night air. Windows cracked open to let heat escape. The hum of insects outside masking sounds that should have raised alarms. and the jury is guided room by room, step by step, following the same path the killer took, familiarity emphasized again and again, because strangers hesitate, strangers get lost, and this was no stranger. The medical examiner's testimony anchors the narrative in reality, blunt and unavoidable, explaining injuries with clinical detachment. Yet each word lands hard, timing narrowed, cause of death clarified with modern certainty, and when asked whether the wounds suggest hesitation or rage, the answer is neither. It's intent, controlled, purposeful, the kind that comes from planning rather than panic, and heads in the jury box slowly nod. Defense attorneys counter by attacking memory because memory is fragile, because 30 years is a long time to hold on to anything clearly, and they argue contamination, suggestion, bias introduced by modern technology overlaying old assumptions. They say this case is built on hindsight, not facts, that the state is trying to retrofit certainty onto a tragedy that was chaotic and unresolved for a reason. But the prosecution anticipates this, introducing evidence not as recollection, but as rediscovery, lab analysts explaining how DNA once invisible can now be isolated, how technology doesn't invent information, it reveals it, and when partial genetic matches are displayed, carefully contextualized, the jury leans forward, because this isn't a story, it's math. Probability stacked against coincidence until coincidence collapses. Financial records follow, mundane on the surface, yet devastating in implication. A withdrawal time too perfectly to ignore, paired with testimony from a bank employee who remembers the defendant's agitation that morning. A detail never recorded because no one asked, and suddenly the day after the murder stops being blank space and becomes a sequence of choices, each one pointing in the same direction. Witnesses from the neighborhood take the stand, voices wavering with age, some apologizing before they speak, explaining how fear kept them quiet, how being wrong felt more dangerous than being silent. And when one admits to hearing something years ago but dismissing it as nothing, the courtroom holds its breath, because everyone understands that sound now, understands how easily truth can be ignored when it asks too much. The late-night tip becomes a focal point, handled delicately, its source protected, but its content dissected, the specificity emphasized, details never released publicly, details only someone present could know, and defense objections fly, but the judge allows it because the law recognizes patterns as much as it does proof, and this pattern is too sharp to smooth away. Cross-examination attempts to fracture the narrative, suggesting alternative suspects, long-gone drifters, acquaintances with shaky alibis, but each theory collapses under scrutiny. Timelines don't align, motives feel forced, and the jury begins to sense what investigators felt years earlier but couldn't articulate, that the truth was always close, hiding in plain sight, protected not by cleverness, but by the limitations of the moment. When the defendant finally takes the stand, the shift is palpable because this is no longer about evidence, it's about presence, about watching someone inhabit a version of events they've lived with privately for decades. And the answers come measured, controlled, phrases chosen carefully, denying knowledge, denying involvement, yet never quite denying proximity, as if distance is the only shield left. Prosecutors let the defendant talk because contradictions don't need encouragement, they surface naturally when a story has been rehearsed too long, and subtle discrepancies emerge, a time slightly off, a memory too precise to be genuine, a claimed ignorance contradicted by earlier statements, and the jury doesn't need them highlighted, they feel them, the way you feel something wrong in a room before you can explain it. Closing arguments arrive not with theatrics, but with gravity, the prosecution reminding the jury that cold cases don't reopen because of obsession. They reopen because something new demands attention, something strong enough to pull truth forward through years of dust and doubt, and they ask the jury not to see this as a resurrection of the past, but as a continuation of justice delayed, not denied. The defense responds by warning against emotional closure masquerading as justice, urging skepticism, cautioning that the desire for answers can warp perception, that certainty is seductive, but often false, and they leave the jury with one question: is this proof beyond reasonable doubt, or simply the most convenient explanation left standing? Deliberations stretch on, hours turning into days, and outside the courthouse, the victim's family waits, not praying for a verdict, but for an ending, any ending, because ambiguity has been the cruelest sentence of all, and as they sit together, they speak in hushed tones, remembering details unrelated to the crime, laughter, habits, fragments of a life that existed before it became a case number. Inside the jury room, timelines are reassembled, exhibits passed hand to hand, arguments replayed, doubts aired and challenged, and slowly, Consensus forms not from certainty alone, but from accumulation, the realization that every alternative requires more assumptions, more coincidences, more faith than the story laid out by the evidence, and faith has no place in verdicts. When the jury files back in, the courtroom stands, breath held collectively, and as the foreperson reads the verdict, the words land with quiet force, not explosive, not triumphant, just final. And the defendant's face registers something between shock and relief, because even condemnation is a form of release after decades of carrying a secret alone. Sentencing comes later, but the damage is already done. Reputations rewritten, family histories altered, and as reporters rush to frame the moment, using phrases like justice at last and cold case solved, those closest to the truth know it's more complicated, because nothing about this erases the years lost, the holidays marked by absence, the birthdays that passed uncelebrated. Yet something has shifted, the weight lifted just enough to breathe, and as the courtroom empties, the investigators linger, sharing glances that say more than words ever could, knowing that this case will follow them forever, not as a victory, but as a reminder that silence can be patient, but truth is relentless, and even after decades, it finds a way to speak, even if its voice is roughened by time, even if it arrives when everyone involved has already aged into someone else. The night refuses to stay quiet once you listen closely enough, and in this town, listening has become a habit learned too late, because every streetlight hum now feels like a witness that never spoke. Every empty porch a place where someone stood and decided to mind their own business, and the story keeps moving whether anyone is ready or not, sliding deeper into the hours after the crime when confusion hardened into routine and routine disguised itself as normal life. Morning came the way it always does in Florida, bright and indifferent, sunlight flattening shadows that had held secrets only hours before, and neighbors stepped outside to water lawns and collect newspapers, unaware that the air still carried something wrong, something unfinished, until sirens cut through the calm and patrol cars sealed off the block with plastic tape that snapped in the heat like a warning too late to matter. Detectives walked the scene slowly, not because they were methodical, but because they were already behind, every minute that passed erasing something that could never be recovered, footprints softened by dew, tire impressions blurred by passing cars, and inside the house, fans still turned lazily, pushing warm air over surfaces that had been touched, wiped, touched again, a choreography of movement frozen only in hindsight. The victim's routine became the first anchor because routine is predictable and predictability suggests deviation. Neighbors explaining what time lights usually went out, which windows stayed open, which radio station played late into the night, and investigators sketched a timeline built on habits rather than proof, aware even then how fragile that foundation was, how easily assumptions collapse under pressure. Interviews followed quickly, a flood of faces, voices overlapping, everyone eager to help, to say something useful, and yet nothing aligned, descriptions vague, times inconsistent, sightings contradictory. A man walking a dog, a car idling too long, a noise that might have been a door, or might have been nothing, and detectives wrote it all down because early chaos is still information, even if it doesn't make sense yet. The first suspect emerged almost automatically, because proximity invites suspicion, a familiar figure whose presence required no explanation, whose name surfaced repeatedly not because of evidence, but because it fit the shape of the question everyone was afraid to ask, and when police brought him in for questioning, the room tightened, expectation heavy, but answers came smoothly, too smoothly, rehearsed without sounding practiced, and nothing stuck. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and the case settled into an uncomfortable rhythm, tips slowing, media attention drifting elsewhere, the file growing thicker while progress stalled, and investigators felt the shift, that moment when urgency fades and persistence becomes stubbornness, when a case risks becoming background noise in a department always chasing the next emergency. Evidence sat in lockers, tagged and sealed, collected with care but processed with limits, technology of the time doing its best and no more, biological samples yielding only partial answers, fingerprints smudged beyond usefulness, and every inconclusive result carried the same quiet message, not yet, maybe someday but not now. The community adjusted in its own way, doors locked earlier, conversations lowered, trust thinned, and the victim's name stopped appearing in headlines, replaced by newer tragedies. Yet in private spaces, the question lingered, asked in kitchens and garages, whispered at bus stops, Who did this, and why are they still here? Investigators rotated, assignments changed, careers advanced, and the case passed from hand to hand, each detective adding notes, circling the same names, tracing the same dead ends, hoping a fresh perspective might see what others missed. But the truth doesn't reveal itself on schedule, and eventually the file was marked with a phrase no one likes to say out loud: cold case. Years moved differently after that, measured not in progress but in distance, the crime receding into memory, becoming something people referenced rather than felt, until anniversaries came and went with little notice, and the house changed owners, repainted, remodeled, its walls absorbing new laughter, new arguments, unaware of the weight beneath the surface. Then, quietly, without ceremony, the past stirred, not because of a revelation, but because of a review, a routine audit of unsolved cases prompted by new funding, new leadership, and a belief that old answers sometimes hide in plain sight, waiting for the right question, and the file was opened again, pages turned by hands that hadn't been there the first time. Details once dismissed took on new shape, a time discrepancy now glaring, a statement that didn't align with physical evidence, a note scribbled in the margin years ago that suddenly felt intentional rather than incidental, and detectives began to sense that the case hadn't gone cold because it lacked truth, but because the truth had been too inconvenient to pursue fully. They re-interviewed witnesses, cautious, respectful, aware that memory degrades, but also that people change. Guilt loosens its grip with age, fear fades, and loyalty expires, and some conversations felt different this time. Pauses longer, answers less certain, as if silence had been holding something back all along. One interview stood out, a former neighbor who had moved away years earlier, now older, slower, but more willing to talk, admitting to noticing something strange that night. A car parked where it didn't belong, a figure standing too still, details they dismissed as imagination, but which now resurfaced with uncomfortable clarity, and detectives listened without interruption, because interruption breaks fragile honesty. Records were pulled again, phone logs, employment histories, financial documents, all digitized now, searchable in ways unimaginable in the early 90s, patterns emerging not through intuition but through algorithms, timelines aligning, absences correlating, and one name kept resurfacing, not loudly but persistently, like a thread that refused to be cut. Attention returned to the original suspect, not with accusation but with curiosity, a re-examination of statements compared against new reconstructions, and discrepancies multiplied, small at first, then impossible to ignore, a claimed phone call that never existed, a timeline that required being in two places at once, and suddenly, the smoothness of earlier answers looked less like confidence and more like concealment. DNA technology became the turning point, samples once inconclusive now viable, sent to modern labs where technicians worked methodically, blind to narrative, focused only on sequences and matches, and when results came back, they didn't shout, they whispered, a partial profile, enough to exclude some, narrow others, and when compared against updated databases, the whisper grew louder. The moment wasn't dramatic, no alarms, no gasps, just a quiet confirmation that something had shifted, that the case had crossed a line from possibility to probability, and investigators felt the weight of that transition, because probability demands action, and action reopens wounds everyone had learned to live with. Surveillance followed, discreet, patient, observing a life that had continued uninterrupted for decades, routines intact, neighbors unaware, and detectives watched, not for spectacle, but for confirmation, for consistency, for the kind of ordinary behavior that hides extraordinary secrets, and each day reinforced the same unsettling thought, that evil doesn't always look the way people expect. A late-night tip arrived during this renewed focus, not anonymous noise, but a detailed account referencing moments never made public, details too specific to dismiss, and detectives recognized it immediately for what it was, not a confession but a crack, the sound of something under pressure beginning to fail. The decision to act came carefully, warrants secured, strategy discussed, aware that after so many years, one mistake could collapse everything, and when they finally knocked on the door, it was with the knowledge that this wasn't just an arrest, it was an interruption of a life built on the assumption that time had erased consequence. Interrogation rooms haven't changed much, fluorescent lights still unforgiving, walls still neutral, but the dynamic was different now. Age on both sides, patience deeper, urgency sharper, and as questions were asked, answers came slower, hesitation creeping in where confidence once lived, and the room filled with something heavy, the sense that the past was finally catching up. No confession yet, no dramatic collapse, just pressure, applied steadily, evidence introduced piece by piece, contradictions highlighted without accusation, and investigators waited, because they understood something fundamental, that truth rarely arrives all at once. It seeps in, unstoppable, until resistance feels pointless and silence becomes more exhausting than speaking. Outside, words spread quietly, reporters catching hints, families sensing movement, and the community felt that old tension return, the memory of a wound reopening, and as the night deepened, the same humid air settling over the town, it felt eerily familiar, as if the past had looped back on itself, demanding to be finished, refusing to remain buried any longer. The hours after that interrogation stretched unnaturally, elastic and heavy, because once a cold case starts breathing again, every second feels borrowed, every movement watched, and investigators understand that momentum is fragile, that it can evaporate if mishandled. So they moved carefully, letting silence do work that shouting never could, letting the suspect sit with the weight of decades pressing inward. Inside the interview room, the air felt stale, not from neglect, but from repetition. The same questions framed slightly differently, the same timelines laid out with clinical precision, and the suspect's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, shoulders tightening, jaw setting, eyes no longer roaming but fixed on the table as if the surface held answers he wasn't ready to give. Detectives didn't rush. They had learned patience the hard way. They let pauses stretch until they became uncomfortable, until the ticking of the wall clock grew louder than the words spoken. Because silence invites thought, and thought invites memory, and memory is dangerous when it has been suppressed for 30 years. Evidence came next, not as an avalanche, but as a drip, each piece placed deliberately. A document slid across the table, a photograph turned slowly, a lab report summarized without drama, and with every reveal, the suspect's breathing changed, shallow at first, then uneven, the body reacting before the mind could assemble defenses. Outside the room, the team watched through glass, exchanging glances rather than words, reading body language like a second script, noting the moments when denial softened into deflection, when certainty gave way to qualification. Because those transitions matter, they signal erosion, the beginning of surrender. But surrender is never immediate, especially not after decades of freedom. The suspect tried distance, then dismissal, suggesting mistakes, bias, coincidence, and investigators allowed it, knowing that arguments exhaust themselves, that logic collapses under its own contradictions when exposed long enough to light. The community, meanwhile, remained unaware of the intensity unfolding behind closed doors. For them, the case existed only as a headline beginning to resurface, a name they half remembered attached to a year that felt impossibly distant. Yet something in the air shifted, conversations lingering on the subject a moment longer, people checking locks with a little more intention. Victims' relatives were notified quietly, cautiously, because reopening wounds requires consent, and detectives approached them with measured language, explaining progress without promising closure, understanding that hope can be as painful as grief when it is uncertain, and the reactions varied: disbelief, guarded optimism, restrained anger, emotions layered over decades of unanswered questions. Back in the investigation, forensic analysts worked in parallel, revisiting evidence with tools unimaginable in the early 90s, extracting data from samples once considered useless, enhancing audio from old recordings, clarifying images blurred by time, and with each advancement, the case sharpened, edges becoming defined where there had only been shadows. A breakthrough came not from technology, but from pattern recognition. A financial record flagged an anomaly, a withdrawal made the morning after the crime at a location the suspect claimed never to visit, and while circumstantial on its own, when layered over inconsistencies, it became significant, another thread pulling at the fabric of denial. Detectives returned to the suspect with this new angle, framing questions gently, almost casually, and the response was telling: not outrage, not confusion, but irritation, the kind that surfaces when a narrative slips beyond control, when rehearsed explanations no longer align with documented reality. The suspect asked for breaks more frequently, water refilled, posture shifting again, this time leaning forward, elbows on the table as if proximity might reassert authority. But authority had already shifted, subtly, decisively, now resting with the facts accumulating outside his influence. Late into the night, the interrogation paused, not because it had failed, but because timing matters and investigators knew that fatigue loosens defenses better than confrontation. So they stepped back, letting the suspect sit alone, thoughts cycling, memories resurfacing uninvited. During that pause, detectives reviewed everything again, aligning timelines across decades, mapping movements, comparing statements given years apart, and what emerged was a portrait of consistency where truth should fluctuate. A story too stable to be authentic, preserved not by memory but by rehearsal. When questioning resumed, the tone shifted slightly, less procedural, more reflective, inviting the suspect to contextualize his life since the crime, successes, failures, relationships, and this strategy worked not by eliciting confession, but by humanizing the gap between who he had been and who he had become, a gap that guilt often fills. Mention of the victim came late, deliberately, introduced not as an accusation, but as a presence, a life interrupted, and the suspect's reaction was immediate, eyes closing briefly, breath catching, the first crack deep enough to be visible, and detectives recognized it instantly. They pressed gently, asking about that night again, encouraging specificity, and for the first time details changed, small adjustments, minor corrections, but corrections nonetheless, and corrections imply error, error implies fabrication, and fabrication implies intent. The suspect requested a lawyer, a move anticipated, respected, and the interrogation paused once more. But the damage was done, statements recorded, shifts documented, and investigators knew they were close, closer than anyone had been in 30 years. Outside, preparations began quietly, arrest paperwork drafted, logistics discussed, not out of certainty, but readiness, because when a cold case reaches this stage, hesitation can undo everything, and they were determined not to let history repeat itself. The arrest came without spectacle, early morning, the suspect taken into custody as neighbors watched with confusion rather than shock, because no one expects the quiet man next door to carry a past like this. And yet, time has a way of normalizing monsters. News broke gradually, headlines cautious at first, emphasizing reopening rather than resolution, but the phrase cold case appeared everywhere, resurrected alongside the year 1992, and the community felt the jolt, the realization that something unresolved had been living among them all along. Victims' family received the call they had waited decades for, not closure, but movement, and their reactions were complex, relief tangled with renewed grief, questions multiplying even as answers approached, because knowing who did it does not explain why, and why is often the heavier burden. Inside the jail, the suspect's demeanor changed, bravado fading, replaced by something quieter, resignation perhaps, or calculation, because confessions are not acts of conscience alone. They are negotiations, and investigators prepared for that reality, understanding that truth often emerges fragmented, shaped by self-interest. Prosecutors joined the case, reviewing evidence with a critical eye, weighing the strength of old proof under modern scrutiny, anticipating defense strategies centered on time, memory, contamination, and they worked closely with detectives to fortify the narrative, to ensure that what had taken decades to uncover would not unravel in court. As the case moved forward, media attention intensified, revisiting archives, interviewing former investigators, reconstructing the night in question with dramatic flair. And while this renewed focus brought awareness, it also risked distortion, and authorities worked to control information, releasing details selectively to preserve integrity. For investigators who had inherited the case late in their careers, the emotional weight was palpable, the sense of carrying not just a file, but a legacy of unfinished work. And as they reviewed the original crime scene photos again, now contextualized by knowledge, the images felt different, less abstract, more accusatory. The suspect, facing mounting evidence, began to test the waters, making statements through counsel, partial admissions framed as misunderstandings, offering cooperation without confession, and detectives listened carefully, because partial truth often precedes full disclosure, a psychological stepping stone toward acceptance. Negotiations continued, not for leniency, but clarity, and as days passed, the narrative solidified, timelines aligning, evidence converging, and the question shifted from if to how much of the truth would be spoken, how much would remain buried with the years already lost. In the community, the case dominated conversation once more, old rumors resurfacing, past suspicions reconsidered, people re-examining memories they had long dismissed, realizing that silence can be as complicit as action, and that the cost of looking away is paid with interest. As night fell again over Florida, humid and still, investigators left the station one by one, exhausted but alert, aware that the hardest part wasn't the arrest, or even the confession that seemed imminent, but what came after, the reckoning, the trial, the final accounting of a crime that had refused to stay buried. And as they drove home through streets unchanged since 1992, they understood something deeply unsettling, that justice delayed does not heal. It only waits, patient and relentless. For the moment, it can no longer be ignored. By the time dawn crept back across the Florida sky, pale and humid, the case had crossed a threshold that could never be uncrossed, because once a suspect is named out loud inside a prosecutor's office, once a file is stamped with intent instead of speculation, the past stops being history and starts demanding accountability, and everyone involved feels that shift immediately, like pressure changing before a storm. The suspect woke in a holding cell that smelled of disinfectant and old concrete, the sounds of the facility unfamiliar despite the decades he had spent avoiding this exact place. And for the first time since 1992, there was no version of the future where this ended quietly, no scenario where time could be blamed, shrugged off, or used as camouflage. Detectives returned to the evidence again, not because they doubted it, but because doubt is what defense attorneys thrive on, and every detail had to withstand scrutiny harsher than anything the investigation had faced before. So they reconstructed timelines down to minutes, mapped movements street by street, compared weather reports, traffic patterns, and utility records, building a narrative so dense that coincidence would suffocate inside it. Witnesses were contacted once more, some reluctantly, others with a sense of obligation sharpened by age, and the conversations felt different now, heavier, because this time there was a face attached to the accusation, a man whose name would soon be printed everywhere, and that reality forced honesty from people who had once settled for ambiguity. One witness broke down during a follow-up interview, admitting that fear had kept them quiet, fear of retaliation, fear of being wrong, fear of becoming involved in something that felt bigger than them, and detectives listened without judgment, because fear explains silence better than apathy ever could. The victim's final hours were reconstructed with painful clarity, movements traced, interactions inferred, habits cross-referenced with testimony, and what emerged was not a chaotic blur, but a sequence, deliberate and escalating, each step narrowing options until escape was no longer possible, and investigators felt the familiar frustration of knowing this now, when knowing it then might have changed everything. Prosecutors examined the confession landscape carefully, aware that what the suspect had said so far amounted to implication rather than admission, and they debated strategy, whether to push harder for a full confession or let the evidence speak, understanding that juries respond differently to words and facts, and that overreaching could poison both. Meanwhile, the suspect's legal team began constructing their defense, focusing on time as both shield and weapon, arguing degraded memory, lost evidence, investigative bias, and they weren't wrong to try, because decades complicate truth, blur responsibility, and give doubt room to grow, but doubt requires space, and the prosecution was determined to leave none. Media coverage intensified, shifting tone from curiosity to certainty, with phrases like solved cold case appearing more confidently, and while officials cautioned against premature conclusions, the narrative had momentum, and momentum is difficult to restrain once public interest takes hold. For the community, the arrest forced a reckoning, because the suspect wasn't an outsider dragged in from elsewhere, he was familiar, woven into daily life, someone people nodded to, spoke with, trusted, and the realization that normalcy can coexist with monstrosity unsettled assumptions people didn't even know they held. Old rumors resurfaced, stories told again with altered emphasis, moments reinterpreted through the lens of hindsight, and suddenly behaviors once dismissed as quirks felt sinister, gaps in alibis suspicious, silence complicit, and the town began rewriting its own memory of the past. Inside the jail, the suspect requested meetings, signaling a willingness to talk, but on his terms, and investigators approached carefully, knowing that control is the last thing people relinquish, and they allowed him to speak without interruption, to frame his story, to test reactions, because listening often reveals more than questioning. His version was fragmented, inconsistent, punctuated by justifications and deflections, minimizing intent, externalizing blame, reshaping events to soften culpability, and detectives recognized the pattern immediately, the slow edging toward confession without crossing the line, the hope that partial truth might be enough to satisfy everyone else while preserving self-image. They countered with evidence, not aggressively, but inexorably, aligning his statements with facts until contradictions piled up, and each time he adjusted, the gap between his story and reality narrowed, tightening like a vice, and the room felt smaller, the air heavier. At one point, the suspect fell silent for an extended stretch, eyes unfocused, breathing shallow, and investigators waited, because silence is where people confront themselves, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, stripped of bravado, acknowledging presence at the scene, proximity to the victim, opportunity undeniable now. It wasn't a full confession, but it was enough to shift the case from circumstantial strength to narrative coherence, and prosecutors were informed immediately, adjusting strategy, preparing charges because the legal threshold had been crossed. The arraignment was brief but symbolic, the suspect standing before a judge as charges were read, his name echoing in a courtroom that felt too small to contain the weight of 30 years, and the victim's family watched, expressions unreadable, absorbing a moment they had imagined countless times but never truly believed would arrive. Bail was denied, the severity of the charges and the weight of evidence making the decision straightforward, and as the suspect was led away, the reality settled in, not just for him but for everyone watching, that the past had finally asserted jurisdiction over the present. In preparation for trial, both sides moved relentlessly, filing motions, contesting admissibility, debating forensic validity, and the case became a battleground between old methods and new science, between memory and measurement, and every ruling carried implications beyond this single crime. Expert witnesses were lined up, forensic analysts prepared to explain complex processes to jurors unfamiliar with DNA profiles and probabilistic matches, and prosecutors rehearsed explanations repeatedly, determined to translate science into certainty without overstatement. Defense attorneys focused on doubt, emphasizing what was missing rather than what was present, questioning chain of custody, highlighting investigative errors from the 90s, and while some critiques held merit, others felt desperate, attempts to resurrect uncertainty where clarity had grown. As trial approached, the suspect's demeanor changed again, resignation settling in, perhaps acceptance, perhaps calculation, and he authorized his attorneys to explore plea discussions, not out of remorse but pragmatism, recognizing that the narrative had outpaced his ability to control it. Negotiations were tense, the prosecution unwilling to compromise on accountability, the defense seeking concessions in exchange for full confession, and these talks revealed a truth often hidden from public view, that justice is not only about punishment, but about information, about knowing what happened and why. The victim's family was consulted, their voices central, their desire for truth overriding calls for vengeance, and they expressed a need to hear it, to know the details, no matter how painful, because uncertainty had been the heaviest sentence of all. As the possibility of confession loomed, investigators revisited the crime scene one final time, standing in the space where everything had begun, now altered by time, but still resonant, and they reflected on the years lost, the opportunities missed, the lives affected by delay, understanding that solving a cold case doesn't restore what was taken, it only names what was done. When the confession finally came, it wasn't dramatic, no tears, no collapse, just words spoken evenly, describing actions detached from emotion, and detectives listened, recording everything, because even in confession, details matter, accuracy matters, and they needed to ensure that this truth, however late, would be complete. The suspect admitted to what evidence had already suggested, acknowledging intent, method, and aftermath, and while his tone remained controlled, something underneath shifted, a release perhaps, or simply exhaustion, the end of a long performance sustained by silence. The community reacted with a mixture of relief and horror as details emerged, headlines confirming what many had feared, and the phrase cold case solved circulated widely, but those closest to the truth understood that solved does not mean finished, that understanding a crime does not erase its impact. As night settled again over Florida, heavy and warm, investigators closed their files for the evening, aware that this chapter was nearing its end, but also aware that the echo of 1992 would never fully fade, because some crimes imprint themselves on a place, lingering long after justice arrives, a reminder that time can hide the truth, but it cannot destroy it. The confession changed the gravity of everything, not by delivering relief, but by rearranging the weight people had carried for decades, because hearing the truth does not lift it, it sharpens it, giving form to what had been an unnamed pressure in the background of everyday life, and as transcripts circulated quietly through offices and courtrooms, every sentence felt like a door closing on a possibility that had once kept hope alive. Investigators dissected the confession line by line, not out of skepticism but responsibility, because a confession is not an ending, it is a claim, and claims must be tested against reality. So timelines were checked again, locations verified, details cross-referenced with evidence collected long before some of the current detectives had even joined the force, and each match tightened the narrative until it felt inescapable. Some discrepancies remained, small gaps where memory faltered or truth was selectively edited, and detectives recognized them for what they were. Not lies necessarily, but omissions, the instinct to protect oneself even when the outcome is sealed, and prosecutors debated whether to press further or accept the confession as sufficient, understanding that perfection is rare and delay can reopen wounds. The victim's family listened to the confession in private, not all at once, breaking it into pieces they could absorb without collapsing, and reactions varied, anger flaring, tears falling, long silences settling. Because truth does not arrive evenly, it lands where it hurts most, and each detail carried a new realization about moments they had replayed in their minds for years. For them, the case had never gone cold, it had simply gone quiet, and now the noise was deafening, media requests piling up, strangers offering sympathy decades late, and they had to decide how visible they wanted to be in a story that had defined their lives without their consent. Prosecutors prepared for trial even as plea negotiations continued, because nothing is final until it is signed, and they understood that confessions can be retracted, challenged, reframed, so they treated it as one pillar among many, not the foundation itself, reinforcing their case with forensic analysis, witness testimony, and a chronology that left little room for doubt. Defense attorneys shifted tactics, no longer denying involvement outright but reframing intent, exploring mitigation, arguing context, mental state, anything that could reduce culpability without contradicting the confession outright, and this reframing was subtle, designed to influence sentencing rather than verdict, acknowledging the reality they could no longer escape. Pretrial hearings became arenas for these arguments, experts testifying about memory decay, stress responses, the reliability of confessions after prolonged interrogation, and judges listened carefully, weighing precedent against the unique nature of a decades-old crime resurrected by modern science. The phrase cold case echoed through these proceedings like a refrain, invoked to explain delays, justify methods, contextualize gaps, and everyone understood its power, because it implied both failure and perseverance, both neglect and hope, and the court had to navigate that duality without letting it overshadow the facts. In the community, people began to talk openly about the night again, sharing stories they had buried, acknowledging fears they had minimized, and this collective remembering felt less like healing and more like excavation, unearthing layers of denial that had allowed life to continue while truth remained dormant. Some residents expressed guilt for not pushing harder, for accepting official silence, for choosing comfort over curiosity, and others bristled at the implication, insisting they had done what they could with what they knew. And these debates revealed a deeper truth, that communities are not passive backdrops to crime. They are participants shaped by what they choose to see and ignore. Schools, churches, civic groups revisited the case in discussions about vigilance and responsibility, using it as a cautionary tale not just about violence but about attention, about the cost of assuming someone else will notice what you overlook. And while these conversations were well-intentioned, they underscored how deeply the case had penetrated the town's identity. As trial dates approached, media coverage intensified again, timelines reconstructed on screen, graphics mapping movements, anchors speaking with certainty that masked how fragile closure still felt, and investigators worried about contamination, about potential jurors absorbing narratives shaped more by drama than evidence. They filed motions to limit coverage, to sequester juries if necessary, aware that the spectacle of a solved cold case can distort perception, turning complexity into morality play, and they were determined to preserve nuance, to ensure that justice would not be compromised by its own visibility. Behind the scenes, the suspect's demeanor shifted once more, the performative calm giving way to something more brittle, moments of irritability punctuated by long withdrawals, and psychologists consulted by the defense noted signs of strain consistent with prolonged cognitive dissonance, the stress of maintaining innocence for decades before abruptly surrendering it. Investigators observed these changes with professional distance, but privately, some acknowledged a strange empathy, not for the crime, but for the human capacity to live with unresolved guilt, to compartmentalize atrocity so thoroughly that it becomes invisible even to oneself, and this recognition complicated their emotions without diminishing their resolve. The plea agreement, when it finally came, was precise, the result of careful negotiation, stipulating charges, sentencing ranges, and most importantly, a full, recorded confession detailing events from beginning to end, leaving no room for reinterpretation later. And while some advocated for trial regardless, the family's wishes tipped the balance. They wanted certainty, not spectacle, truth without the risk of reversal, and their decision was respected, though not without criticism from those who equated justice exclusively with maximum punishment, and this debate echoed larger societal tensions about what accountability should look like. In court, the plea was entered calmly, almost anticlimactically, the suspect's voice steady as he acknowledged guilt, the judge methodical in confirming understanding, and when the words were finally spoken, guilty, the room felt suspended, as if everyone needed a moment to recalibrate around a reality that had been hypothetical for so long. Sentencing was scheduled later, allowing impact statements, and during that interval, the town existed in a strange limbo, the case technically resolved but emotionally raw, people unsure how to talk about it now that it had an ending, because endings require reinterpretation of everything that came before. Victim impact statements were prepared with care, drafts revised repeatedly, balancing honesty with restraint, and when they were finally read, they filled the courtroom with something heavier than anger, a quiet articulation of loss that had matured over time, stripped of theatrics, devastating in its simplicity. The suspect listened without visible reaction, eyes fixed forward, and observers debated what that meant. Remorse suppressed or absent, shock, dissociation, but investigators knew better than to speculate, understanding that inner states are rarely legible, especially after years of practiced concealment. The judge delivered the sentence firmly within the agreed range, acknowledging the unique harm of delayed justice, the compounded suffering inflicted by years of uncertainty, and emphasized that while time had passed, responsibility had not diminished, and as the gavel fell, the case crossed another threshold, from active pursuit to historical fact. Outside the courthouse, reactions spilled into the streets, microphones thrust forward, statements offered, declined, emotions contained, released, and the phrase "cold case solved" appeared in headlines again, now with finality. Yet for those closest to it, solved felt inadequate, too neat for something that had consumed so much life. Investigators returned to their offices, closing files they had opened obsessively for years, feeling an unexpected emptiness, because resolution creates space where obsession once lived, and not everyone knows what to do with that space immediately. Some reflected on other cold cases still waiting, folders untouched, names forgotten by all but a few, and the success of this investigation reinvigorated efforts, reminding them that patience can pay off, that progress is uneven but possible, and that silence is not the same as absence. For the community, life resumed its rhythms, but altered subtly, conversations carrying a new caution, a deeper awareness that safety is not guaranteed by familiarity, and that the past is not past simply because it is inconvenient to confront. As months passed, the case settled into memory again, this time with an ending attached, and while the scars remained, they were mapped now, understood, integrated into the town's story rather than floating unresolved at its edges. Yet even with sentencing complete, investigators knew the case would never fully rest, because cold cases leave residues, influencing how future crimes are approached, how evidence is preserved, how silence is interpreted, and in that sense, the story continued not as a mystery, but as a lesson written in the margins of institutional memory. Late at night, long after the headlines faded, some detectives still thought about 1992, about the night everything changed and the years that followed without answers, and they understood something essential, that justice does not arrive on time. It arrives when persistence outlasts forgetting, and even then it never arrives alone. It brings with it the weight of what was lost while everyone waited. The night refuses to loosen its grip, even after all these years, and the Florida air still feels heavy with what was left behind, because by the time this cold case reaches its 8th turning point, the silence itself has become a suspect, thick and oppressive, pressing against every memory like humidity against bare skin. The town learned long ago how to function around absence. Houses were sold. Streets were renamed. Children grew up and left. But the case never moved out. It lingered in filing cabinets, in the yellowing edges of photographs, in the way certain names still caused conversations to drop a few degrees colder. Every investigator who touched the file felt the same thing. Not just the weight of unsolved violence, but the sense that the truth had been breathing quietly nearby for decades, waiting for the smallest crack to slip through. The reopened investigation doesn't advance with a dramatic revelation at first. It advances with tedium, with hours spent listening to tape hiss and background noise, with notebooks filled with timelines rewritten again and again, each version slightly different, each adjustment an admission that the original story never quite made sense. Detectives notice the gaps now, gaps that once seemed insignificant. A 15-minute window that no one accounted for. A vehicle sighting dismissed as unreliable because the witness was tired, because it was dark, because it was easier to ignore. A neighbor who heard something but convinced themselves it was nothing because admitting otherwise would have meant living with fear. These are not mistakes born of malice. They are the quiet failures of human nature, the same failures that allow cold cases to freeze solid. One investigator fixates on the night itself, not the crime scene photographs but the sounds described in early statements. The way people talked about the quiet. Not peaceful quiet, not sleeping quiet, but the kind of silence that feels interrupted, as if something has just stopped. He listens again to an emergency call logged hours later, a voice strained and uncertain, a caller unsure whether what they saw even mattered anymore. In 1992, it was written off as confusion. In the present, it feels like a tremor before an earthquake, small but undeniable. The suspect, now formally under scrutiny, is not the monster the public imagined back then. He never was. He blended in. He aged. He paid taxes. He stood in lines at grocery stores. He attended funerals for people who had no idea what he carried. When detectives begin mapping his life backward, they see how close he always was. Same neighborhoods, same roads, same bars. Not a shadow on the edge of the frame, but a figure standing plainly in the background, unnoticed because he looked like everyone else. That realization lands hard. The danger wasn't hidden. It was familiar. Old acquaintances are contacted, some reluctantly, others with a strange relief. They talk now because time has thinned the fear, because loyalty has expired, because guilt matures even when memories fade. One former coworker recalls a comment made offhand years ago, a joke that didn't sound like a joke anymore once the dates were aligned. Another remembers a sudden change in routine after the crime, a move that felt rushed, a lease broken without explanation. Each recollection is small, almost fragile, but together they form a shape that investigators can no longer ignore. Forensic science, once a dead end, becomes a pressure point. Evidence that sat untouched for decades is re-examined with modern eyes. Fibers once deemed inconclusive now speak a clearer language. A partial print, previously useless, suddenly fits into a database that did not exist when the case first went cold. It's not a single miracle breakthrough. It's accumulation. Science doesn't shout. It whispers over and over until denial becomes impossible. The suspect senses the shift before the arrest ever happens. People always do. He notices unfamiliar cars parked too long on familiar streets. He feels questions land differently, heavier, sharper. Friends say he grows quieter. Others say he becomes defensive, snapping at things that never bothered him before. A life built on silence begins to crack under its own weight. Investigators watch patiently. There is no rush now. The case has waited 30 years. Can wait a little longer to do this right. Meanwhile, the victim's name returns to headlines, not as a ghost, but as a person again. Journalists dig into who they were before they became a case number. Old photographs resurface, smiling faces that feel almost accusatory, as if asking why it took so long. The community reacts with a mix of hope and dread. Solving a cold case doesn't just promise justice. It threatens to reopen wounds people learn to live with. Some want answers desperately. Others would rather not disturb what they've buried. Detectives sit across from the suspect for the first formal interview. The room stripped of intimidation, deliberately ordinary. No raised voices. No dramatic accusations. Just time, silence, and carefully placed facts. They watch his eyes when certain details are mentioned. They note which dates cause hesitation, which names produce micro-expressions too fast to fake. He denies everything, of course. He has denied it for decades, even if only privately. But denial after this much time has a different texture. It sounds rehearsed, sounds tired. What surprises investigators most is not what he says, but what he avoids. He refuses to speculate. He refuses to imagine. He refuses to fill gaps that an innocent person might attempt to bridge. His story is clean to the point of emptiness. No unnecessary details. No emotional detours. Just a straight line that feels carved rather than remembered. That too becomes evidence. Outside the interview room, the weight of the moment settles in. This is no longer an abstract pursuit of truth. This is a countdown. Warrants are drafted. Prosecutors review stacks of paper thick enough to bruise. Every decision is scrutinized because mistakes now would not just delay justice. They could destroy it permanently. The margin for error is gone. As night falls again, Florida feels unchanged on the surface. Traffic hums. Neon lights flicker. Waves hit the shore with indifferent rhythm. But something fundamental has shifted. The silence that protected the truth for so long is no longer intact. It's fractured, leaking details, names, consequences. The case, once frozen, is moving fast now, thawing into something dangerous and undeniable. And somewhere, in a house filled with ordinary objects and ordinary noise, the suspect sits awake longer than usual, listening to sounds he once ignored. Every passing car feels closer. Every knock in memory feels louder. The past, which he believed he had outlived, is no longer behind him. It's closing in step by careful step, and for the first time in decades, the cold case is no longer cold. It's breathing. By the time the investigation reaches this point, the cold case is no longer something detectives work on. It is something that follows them home, crawls into their thoughts at night, and waits for them in the quiet moments between phone calls. Florida mornings still break with sunlight and routine, but inside the task force room, time feels compressed, stretched thin by urgency and restraint. Every wall is covered now. Timelines overlap. Photographs bleed into one another. The victim's face, once a grainy black and white image, has been restored, sharpened, turned almost painfully human. It stares out from the board like a witness who never left. The suspect's name sits at the center of everything, circled in red, no longer hypothetical, no longer whispered, carries weight now. History, gravity. Investigators move carefully around it, because naming someone after decades of silence is not an ending. It is an ignition. One wrong step could turn a lifetime of waiting into another collapse, another missed chance that the case would never recover from. Behind closed doors, prosecutors and detectives dissect every statement the suspect has ever given, not just recently, but across his entire life. Old traffic stops, employment forms, casual interviews from unrelated matters. The way he answered questions when nothing was at stake. The way his language changed when something was. Patterns emerge slowly, like images in a developing tray. He speaks in absolutes when lying. He uses distance, that person, that situation, instead of names. He avoids timelines unless pressed. These are not proof. They are pressure points. The interview room becomes a theater of patience. Detectives return, not to confront, but to wait. Silence is their sharpest tool. They let it stretch, let it thicken, until it becomes uncomfortable enough to provoke movement. The suspect shifts in his chair. He clears his throat. He asks for water more often than necessary. He talks about things that don't matter. The weather, his health, how long this is going to take. They let him. Every word is another thread. At one point, a detective slides a photograph across the table. Not of the crime scene, not of evidence, but of the town in 1992. A wide shot, familiar streets, a building that no longer exists. The suspect's eyes linger just a fraction of a second too long. Not on the image itself, but on a detail only someone present would recognize. It's subtle. It would mean nothing to anyone else. But to investigators, it lands like a dropped plate in a silent room. Outside the interrogation space, the community begins to sense what is coming. Rumors circulate, sharper now, more specific. People start connecting dots they once refused to see. A neighbor remembers an argument that felt excessive. A bartender recalls a man who drank alone and left suddenly one night, pale and shaken. A former friend replays conversations in their head and realizes how carefully certain topics were avoided. Memory, once unreliable, becomes relentless when given permission to speak. The victim's family, long accustomed to disappointment, is brought in carefully, deliberately. They are not promised justice. They are not offered closure. They are told the truth. The case is moving, but it is fragile. Every reaction matters. Every public word carries consequences. They listen with expressions shaped by decades of grief, a mixture of hope and exhaustion that no training manual prepares investigators to witness. When they ask if the suspect is scared, no one answers. Fear at this stage is not measurable. Only tension is. Forensic results arrive in waves. A lab report confirms what investigators already believed but could not prove. A match partial but persuasive. A probability that crosses the threshold from coincidence to inevitability. Another piece falls into place when a vehicle registration surfaces, long buried in archived records, placing the suspect closer to the scene than he ever admitted. Each document tightens the circle. Each one reduces the space he has left to stand. Yet still no arrest. Not yet. This is the moment where cold cases often fail, not from lack of evidence but from haste. Everyone involved feels the pressure. Media outlets are preparing headlines they cannot publish. Superiors want timelines. The public wants resolution. But detectives slow everything down instead. They review again. They question their own assumptions. They invite outside eyes to challenge the narrative. They know the cost of certainty built too quickly. The suspect, meanwhile, begins to unravel in quieter ways. He calls an old acquaintance late at night, asking strange questions, probing for what people remember. He revisits places he hasn't seen in years, driving slowly, lingering too long. Surveillance notes the behavior without interpreting it. They don't need interpretation. The pattern is familiar. It's the behavior of someone realizing that time, once his greatest ally, has turned against him. During one interview, the conversation drifts unexpectedly. A detective asks about regret. Not about the crime, not directly, but about life. About things left unsaid. Opportunities missed. The suspect scoffs at first, dismissive. Then something shifts. His voice lowers. He talks about how people misunderstand what it means to carry something alone. The room goes still. No one interrupts. He stops himself just in time, swallowing words that nearly escape. Nearly is enough. The task force meets late into the night. Coffee goes cold. Voices grow hoarse. They debate strategy, not guilt. They already believe they know the truth. The question is how to let the truth speak in a way that survives courtrooms, appeals, history. They decide to wait for one more piece, not because they need it, but because it will remove any remaining doubt. A final witness. A final confirmation. Something that closes the loop so completely that denial becomes a formality. When that piece arrives, it doesn't come with drama. It comes quietly, through a tip line that has waited decades for a call like this. An older voice, hesitant, apologetic, someone who knew or suspected or ignored something back then and has lived with it ever since. They provide a detail no one outside the investigation should know. A detail that locks everything into place. The room is silent after the call ends. No chairs. No celebration. Just the heavy recognition that a line has been crossed, that there is no turning back now. Warrants are finalized. Dates are set. The machine begins to move. As night settles again over Florida, the suspect senses it. He doesn't know how or why, but the air feels different. The silence that once protected him now presses inward, suffocating rather than concealing. Somewhere nearby, the case he thought he outlasted is no longer content to wait. The cold case, after decades of stillness, is about to speak out loud. Dawn arrives without ceremony, pale and humid. the kind of Florida morning that pretends nothing is about to change. But inside the task force headquarters, everything is already in motion. Phones vibrate instead of ring. Doors close softly. Paperwork moves hand to hand with the care of something fragile and volatile. This is the hour when a cold case stops being history and becomes present tense, when decades of waiting compress into a single decision that cannot be undone. The arrest warrant is read one last time, not for legality, but for gravity. Every word matters. Every clause carries the weight of a life interrupted in 1992 and another shaped by secrecy ever since. The name of the suspect looks different now, printed in bold, no longer shielded by uncertainty. It is no longer a theory. It is an accusation backed by time, patience, and the quiet persistence of facts that refuse to disappear. Outside, unmarked vehicles idle in places chosen weeks ago. Surveillance teams take positions they have memorized in the dark. The suspect's routine has been mapped down to minutes. What time he leaves the house, where he parks, how long he lingers before locking the door. Habits become vulnerabilities when watched long enough. No one rushes. There is no adrenaline-fueled countdown. This is controlled, deliberate, almost solemn. When the moment comes, it unfolds without drama. A knock, a pause. The door opens. The suspect's face registers confusion first, then recognition, not of the officers, but of inevitability. He doesn't resist. He doesn't ask why. He only exhales, a long, measured breath, as if he has been holding it for 30 years and only now realizes how tired his lungs are. Handcuffs close with a sound that feels too small for what it represents. The reading of rights is calm, procedural, almost gentle. Neighbors peer through curtains, sensing importance without understanding it. Some recognize the man, some don't. None of them know yet that they are witnessing the final movement of a story that began before many of them lived on this street. News of the arrest travels faster than the vehicles carrying the suspect downtown. Inside the station, there is no applause, no celebration. Detectives exchange brief looks, nods heavy with meaning. This is not victory. This is responsibility. Everything that happens next will be examined, dissected, challenged. The cold case has been reopened, yes, but now it must survive the heat. The interrogation room feels different this time. The suspect sits straighter, quieter. The bravado from earlier interviews is gone, replaced by a careful neutrality. He listens more than he speaks. When he does speak, his words are measured, deliberate, chosen for effect. Investigators don't push immediately. They let the room settle. Let the reality of the situation seep in. Arrest changes the rules. It also changes the tone. They begin not with accusations, but with time. 30 years is a long stretch to carry anything alone. They talk about memory, how it distorts, how it sharpens, how some details fade while others refuse to soften. They place documents on the table one by one. Lab results, timelines, witness statements. Not all at once. Never all at once. The suspect watches them carefully, his eyes flicking from page to page, calculating what they know and what they don't. At one point, they show him something he didn't expect. Not evidence, but a letter. A copy of a note written by the victim years before her death. It's mundane, ordinary, but it humanizes what he spent decades turning into an abstraction. His jaw tightens. For the first time since the arrest, emotion cracks through the surface. It's brief, controlled, but it's there. Hours pass. The interview ebbs and flows, circling closer without closing in. Detectives are not seeking a confession born of pressure. They want truth that stands on its own. When the suspect finally speaks about the night in question, he does so indirectly, as if describing someone else's memory. He corrects a timeline before being prompted. He mentions a sound that was never public. He stops himself, then continues, resigned. Outside the room, prosecutors listen through glass and headsets, already preparing for the battles ahead. They know what defense attorneys will argue. Memory contamination, circumstantial bias, the unreliability of decades-old evidence. They also know what the jury will see. Not a rush to judgment, but a methodical pursuit that refused to let time erase accountability. Word reaches the victim's family quietly, through a phone call arranged with care. There is no shouting, no collapse, just silence, followed by tears that sound different from the ones they've shed for years. These are not tears of relief. They are tears of recognition. Something they feared might never happen has finally arrived, and now they must learn how to live with it. As the day wears on, the media gathers. Cameras point at doors that have never mattered before. Reporters rehearse phrases like, cold case solved, and decades of silence broken, unaware of how fragile those words still are. Inside, investigators remain insulated from the noise. They know better than to believe the story is over. Arrest is a chapter, not a conclusion. Late in the evening, the suspect is transferred to a holding cell. Alone now, stripped of strategy and audience, he sits with the weight of what has happened. The silence here is different from the silence he mastered for years. This one does not protect him. It echoes. It reflects. It offers no distractions. Somewhere down the corridor, a door closes. Somewhere else, a clock ticks too loudly. The task force reconvenes one last time before dispersing. They review what went right, what must still be guarded, what comes next. Appeals will come. Motions will be filed. Every detail will be scrutinized by people who were not there, who did not wait, who did not feel the slow burn of a case that refused to die. But that is how it must be. Justice, to endure, must be tested. As night settles again over Florida, the town begins to absorb the shock. Conversations happen behind closed doors. Old memories resurface. People reconsider what they thought they knew. The arrest doesn't just resolve a crime, it reopens a collective past. A reminder that time does not absolve, that silence does not equal innocence, that some truths are patient beyond imagination. The cold case, once a box on a shelf, is now a living thing again, moving through courtrooms, headlines, and hearts. It has stepped out of the shadows, carrying with it the voices that waited decades to be heard. And though the final verdict still lies ahead, one thing is already certain. The silence that protected the truth for so long has finally been broken, and nothing in this story will ever be quiet again.